6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. But then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, and they saw no one around them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Well, it is an honor to be here with you this morning as your Martha Stearns Marshall preacher. So I have a question for you to start out. What is it that is longing to be born within your soul? We're about to enter into Lent now, a winter season of wilderness, gestation, and revelation. So what is it that's forming in the decaying leaves of your soul, soaking up their nutrients and waiting for spring when they will burst forth into life? What are the fields of your soul that need tilling and tending? And which are the areas that are the most fertile? Tell me, who is it that will accompany you during the season of wandering, birth-giving, and blossoming? Spiritual direction author Margaret Gunther refers to a mysterious figure she names only as the little old Appalachian granny woman. Now, she is the stereotypical midwife figure. She's about 100 years old, and she rides on the back of a mule through the mountains to remote shacks and villages to help women give birth. But what are we to do today with our own remote shacks and villages of our souls? The places where the wind howls and there are broken branches strewn throughout the path. Perhaps there are places that are difficult to tread upon, or maybe there are places that are even painful to touch. There might even be places that are so dark that the light can't get in to wash away the shame. Now, friends, today is Transfiguration Sunday. We heard earlier that Jesus took his disciples up to a mountaintop and suddenly burst into light before them. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was hiking with a friend and this happened, I wouldn't know what to say either. But Peter mumbles and finally finds his words and says, "Well, Lord, why don't we just stay up here on the mountaintop forever? We can build a house for you, a house for Elijah, and a house for Moses." But friends, we know that life is not a mountaintop experience. And while it's great to feel connected to God, to feel a sense of the transcendent and the divine, the real part of the journey is on the opposite side of the mountain, back into the valley and the everyday muck and mire of what it means to be human. Lent is a time of wilderness. It's a time of being lost and wandering. So maybe you are feeling a sense of lostness in your own life, or maybe you have gone through some kind of loss lately. Maybe you have lost a friend or a family member. Maybe you've lost a job or just simply experienced some kind of injustice or oppression. I'm here today to tell you that I think that God does not ever will us to suffer, but suffering can transform us like a refining fire. When we experience losses, that is when we are most open to receiving God's love, because everything else that is unimportant or not spiritually essential falls away. Has anyone here ever been up to the Overlook Park at Clinton Lake and gone up that large hill? Yeah. So I find myself usually becoming out of breath as I get towards the top. But what I don't expect is on the other way back down that it hurts my knees even more than it did going up. And I think that life can be kind of like that when we are going into a wilderness period of our lives. So now that we don't have figures like the little old Appalachian granny woman to guide us, who might those figures be for us in our modern life? Now, I'm a big believer in the statement that when the student is ready, a teacher will appear. This has happened for me over and over again in my own life. So Gunther tells us that when we are ready to take this Lenten journey into the wilderness, we must learn to reclaim the wisdom of our spiritual elders. Now, oftentimes, elders are just that. They are people who are advanced in years, and they've seen every single thing there is to see and experience on the face of this planet. But sometimes elders also come in younger form too, so it's good to keep an open mind and listen sometimes. But the importance of finding these guides is that they are a host, and they provide shelter and a place of rest and refreshment when we are in these times of lostness and spiritual wandering. So this week, I invite you to think of who that person might be for you. It might be somebody here in the congregation today, a part of your church family. It may also be an administrative assistant where you work, or a trusted mentor or spiritual friend. But wisdom comes in many places, so it may also be the person who takes out the trash or cleans the toilets. I think garbage collectors have some of the most profound wisdom to offer us if we are simply willing to stop and listen to them. And remember that finding shelter in the wilderness is of utmost importance. It is not simply a luxury, but it ensures survival when we are in these desert or frontier spaces of our lives. So as we get ready to enter into Lent, I invite you to name for yourself now 2 to 3 people who will offer you shelter, rest, and refreshment as we start our Lenten journey together. So once we have set up camp with our guide in our own spiritual wilderness, we need to do something that Gunther calls spiritual house cleaning, putting our spiritual house back into order. So I have another question for you today. What is your spiritual junk? Those things that you no longer use in your life, or things that are holding you back. Now, this could be literal physical junk. I won't tell anyone if you have a messy garage or basement. It's okay. I do too. But it could also be an unhealthy relationship that is holding you back. An unhealthy relationship to a person, such as a friendship, an unhealthy relationship to a substance, or maybe it's just a relationship that's no longer serving you. On the other end of that spectrum, you may have someone in your life who you need to reach out to again, someone who's suffering or in a time of grief or their own wilderness, maybe a relative you haven't spoken to in a long time. So once you've decided what your spiritual junk is, what you can discard and what you need to keep, I invite you also to name for yourself, what are your hidden spiritual treasures? Things that need to be repurposed and perhaps even rebirthed. Maybe you have an antique chair at home that's a family heirloom that you would like to refurnish and refurbish. There may also be a precious family ritual to you that you may need to reinstitute. Maybe your grandmother always lit candles before she said a prayer at dinner. Or maybe there's a birthday song that you would like to continue for your own child. These are the things that anchor and hold us in times of spiritual wilderness. A ritual anchors us when we are in times of grief and loss and wilderness. So, I want to tell you today that the journey awaits you, and so does the midwife or your guide. But it is you who must take that courageous first step, down from the top of the mountain with your guide through the wilderness of Lent, taking shelter when you need to, but when you feel safe and that deep sense of homecoming, because you are with guides and people who you trust, like your church family, do your own spiritual house cleaning. So at the end of your journey, you will experience the unconditional love of Christ and his redeeming salvific hope for the world. Amen.